I woke up to the sound of construction equipment tearing through the piece of my Montana property, and my first thought was that someone had made a catastrophic mistake. My name is Henry Fitzgerald, and I own 120 acres of pristine meadowland just outside Bozeman, Montana. I had inherited the property from my grandfather 5 years ago, and it had been my sanctuary ever since. Rolling grassland stretched as far as the eye could see, bordered by mountains that looked like something out of a postcard. I ran a small cattle operation, nothing fancy, just enough to keep the land working and myself satisfied. 20 head of Angus cattle, rotating through different pastures throughout the year. It was simple, honest work, and it was mine. But that morning in early May, everything changed. I pulled on my boots and headed out to investigate the noise. What I found made my blood run cold. 3 workers in bright yellow vests were unloading lumber from a massive truck, right in the middle of my eastern meadow. Behind them, a small excavator was already digging holes in my land. The grass I had carefully maintained, the wildflowers that were just beginning to bloom, all of it being torn up without so much as a warning. "Hey," I shouted, jogging toward them. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" One of the workers, a middle-aged guy with a hard hat, looked up from his clipboard. "Morning. We're with Mountain View Construction, here to build the new community playground." "On my property," I said, my voice rising. "This is private land. You need to stop right now." The foreman frowned and flipped through his papers. "Says here we're on HOA common land, plot 73B. We got all the permits." "There is no HOA here," I said firmly. "This is my land, I own it. Check your maps again." That is when I learned about the nightmare that would consume my life for the next several months. Apparently, 2 years ago, a developer had purchased several parcels of land surrounding my property and created a new subdivision called Mountain Ridge Estates. The subdivision had its own HOA, and somehow, through either incompetence or fraud, they had registered my eastern meadow as part of their common area. I had never received any notices, never signed anything, never even heard of Mountain Ridge Estates until that very moment. The construction foreman was apologetic, but said he could not stop without orders from his boss, who took orders from the HOA board. He gave me a phone number and suggested I sort it out with them directly. I called immediately, standing right there in my meadow as workers continued unloading materials around me. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. "Mountain Ridge Estates, HOA. This is Barbara speaking." I explained the situation as calmly as I could manage, which admittedly was not very calm. Barbara listened with what I could only describe as condescending patience. "Sir, I understand your concern, but our records clearly show that parcel as HOA property. If you believe there is an error, you will need to submit a formal dispute in writing, along with your property deed and survey documents. The board meets once a month, and they will review your claim at the next available meeting." "The next available meeting?" "Your people are destroying my land right now today. Stop the construction." "I cannot do that without board approval, sir. The playground project has been approved and budgeted. I suggest you get your documents together and attend our next meeting on the 1st Tuesday of June." "June? That is 4 weeks away." "Yes, sir. 1st Tuesday of every month, 7 p.m. at the community center. Have a nice day." She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, watching strangers tear up my meadow. I called the sheriff's office next. Deputy Martinez arrived within an hour, listened to both sides, examined my property deed, and looked at the HOA's documentation. The problem was immediately clear to him but legally murky. "Mr. Fitzgerald, you clearly own this land. Your deed is ironclad, been in your family since the 1960s. but the HOA has filed paperwork with the county claiming it as common area. Someone screwed up badly, either at the county office or the HOA just filed fraudulent documents. Either way, this is a civil matter. I cannot arrest anyone or force them to stop without a court order. So what am I supposed to do? Just let them build on my land? Martinez looked uncomfortable. I would recommend getting a lawyer and filing for an emergency injunction. That is really your only option here. I will file a report documenting the discrepancy, and that might help your case. I spent the rest of that day on the phone with lawyers. Most wanted retainers I could not afford, or could not see me for weeks. Finally, I found a young attorney named Rebecca Walsh who agreed to take the case and promised to file for an emergency injunction by the end of the week. It was the best I could do. By the time the sun set that evening, the construction crew had dug 20 holes in my meadow and left their equipment parked on my grass. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, I drove to the county records office in Bozeman. A helpful clerk named Susan pulled up all the relevant documents on her computer. What we discovered was stunning in its negligence. The HOA had filed a plat map 2 years earlier, and someone at the county office had approved it without checking it against existing property deeds. My parcel was clearly labeled on the plat as HOA common area, despite the fact that I had never sold it, never been contacted, and still paid property taxes on it. This is a major error, Susan said, shaking her head. I do not know how this got through. It should have been caught immediately. Can you fix it? I can flag it as disputed and start the correction process, but that does not give you any immediate relief. You will still need a court order to stop any construction. I drove home feeling defeated. The construction crew was back at it, this time setting posts in concrete. They had started framing what looked like the outline of a large playground structure with swings, slides, and climbing equipment. It would have been nice, I suppose, if it were not being built on land that did not belong to them. Over the next week, I tried everything. I put up no trespassing signs, which the construction crew ignored. I called the HOA office daily, always getting the same Barbara, who always gave me the same scripted responses. I contacted the development company that had hired the construction firm, but they refused to get involved, saying it was between me and the HOA. My lawyer filed for the emergency injunction, but the court date was set for 3 weeks out. Apparently, my emergency was not legally urgent enough. The playground took shape quickly. Professional construction crews worked fast. Within 10 days, the basic structure was complete. Swings hung from sturdy beams. A twisting slide gleamed in the sun. Monkey bars and climbing walls stood ready for children who would be trespassing on my property to use them. I attended the HOA meeting on the first Tuesday of June with my lawyer. The Mountain Ridge Estates Community Center was a nice building, all modern architecture and big windows overlooking their manicured subdivision. Inside, about 30 residents sat in folding chairs facing a long table where the HOA board presided. The board president was a woman named Karen Ashton, and she was exactly what I had expected. Mid-40s, highlighted blonde hair cut in that specific style that somehow every HOA president seemed to have, and an expression that suggested she had never been told no in her life. Karen called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. They went through standard business first, budget reports, complaints about barking dogs, someone's fence being the wrong shade of brown. Finally, after 45 minutes, they got to me. "We have a guest tonight," Karen said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Henry Fitzgerald, who claims that our beautiful new playground is built on his property. Mr. Fitzgerald, you have 5 minutes to present your case." My lawyer stood and presented our evidence. My deed, my survey, my tax records, all proving beyond any doubt that I owned the land. She explained the error in the county records and provided documentation of the correction process already underway. It was clear, concise, and irrefutable. Karen listened with her arms crossed. When Rebecca finished, Karen smiled. "Thank you for that presentation. However, the HOA has also done its due diligence. When we purchased the land for our development, we had professional surveys done. Those surveys clearly showed the playground parcel as unclaimed common area. We followed all proper procedures, filed all correct paperwork, and spent over $60,000 of our homeowners' money building a facility for our community's children. We are not simply going to tear it down because you wave some old papers around." "These old papers are a legal property deed," Rebecca said sharply. "Your survey was wrong. The county has already acknowledged the error." "The county has acknowledged that there is a dispute," Karen corrected. "Until a court rules otherwise, we consider the matter settled. The playground stays." Several board members nodded. A few residents clapped. I felt my face getting hot. "You are trespassing," I said, standing up. "You built on my land without permission. That is illegal." "That is your opinion," Karen said dismissively. "Our legal team disagrees. If you want to pursue this, we will see you in court. But I warn you, this HOA has substantial legal resources, and we will protect our community's interests vigorously." The meeting moved on to other topics. We were dismissed, just like that. Outside, Rebecca put a hand on my arm. "That went about as well as I expected. Do not worry. We have the law on our side. The injunction hearing is next week, and once the judge sees the evidence, they will have to stop using the playground and likely remove it. And if they do not, they will. Trust me." But I did not trust the system anymore. I had watched it fail me at every turn so far. The injunction hearing was held in the Gallatin County Courthouse on a Wednesday morning. The judge was a stern woman named Patricia Hendricks, who looked thoroughly annoyed to be dealing with what she clearly saw as a petty land dispute. Both sides presented their cases. Rebecca was brilliant, laying out the facts methodically. The HOA's lawyer, a slick guy named Douglas Pemberton, tried to argue that I had abandoned the property by not developing it, that the county's approval of the HOA plat gave them legitimate claim, and that the community's interest outweighed my individual property rights. Judge Hendricks asked pointed questions. She seemed skeptical of the HOA's position, especially when Pemberton could not explain how they had surveyed the land without discovering my existing deed. After 2 hours of arguments, she took a brief recess to review the documents. When she returned, she looked tired. "I am granting a preliminary injunction," she said. "The HOA will cease all use of the playground structure immediately pending a full trial to determine rightful ownership. Furthermore, the HOA is ordered to remove all signage directing residents to the playground and to post notices that the facility is closed. Mr. Fitzgerald, you are within your rights to secure the area to prevent trespassing. This order is effective immediately." I felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone with authority had listened. Karen Ashton's face turned red. "Your Honor, that playground cost $60,000. You cannot just shut it down." "I just did," Judge Hendricks said flatly. "You should have verified ownership before building. Court adjourned." I went home that afternoon feeling like I had won something. Rebecca warned me that the full trial would take months to schedule, but at least the playground would not be used in the meantime. I put up a proper fence around the playground area that weekend. Nothing fancy, just T-posts and wire to mark the boundary and keep people out. The HOA ignored the injunction immediately. The following weekend, I drove past the playground and saw dozens of children playing on the equipment, parents watching from benches that had been installed along the perimeter. The fence I had put up had been cut down and removed. New signs pointed toward community playground with arrows and cheerful graphics. I called my lawyer. She called the court. The court issued a contempt order. The sheriff's office served it to Karen Ashton personally. She paid the $500 fine without comment and changed nothing. "They are betting you cannot afford to keep fighting," Rebecca told me over the phone. "Every contempt charge, every legal motion, it all costs money. They have an HOA budget funded by hundreds of homeowners. They can outlast you financially." She was right. I had already spent $8,000 on legal fees. I had maybe another $5,000 I could spare before I would have to start selling cattle or taking out loans. The full trial was scheduled for October, 4 months away. I could not afford 4 more months of legal battles. That is when I decided to stop playing their game and start playing mine. I owned cattle. 20 head of black Angus cattle, to be specific. Beautiful animals, well-behaved, grass-fed, and producing excellent beef. They were currently grazing in my western pasture, but there was no reason they could not graze in my eastern pasture. The eastern pasture that just happened to have a playground built on it. The idea came to me on a Sunday morning while I was feeding the herd. Cattle are natural lawnmowers. They eat grass, they fertilize as they go, and they are completely indifferent to human construction. If the HOA wanted to pretend my meadow was their playground, then I would use my meadow exactly as I had always intended to use it. I spent that afternoon reinforcing the fence around the entire eastern pasture, making sure it was secure and cattle-proof. I left the playground structure itself unfenced inside the pasture. Then I opened the gate and let my cattle through. 20 head of cattle discovered the playground with what I can only describe as bovine curiosity. They sniffed at the swings, rubbed against the support posts, and immediately began grazing on the grass around the structure. Within an hour, the pristine playground area looked like what it actually was, a pasture with some weird metal structures in it. I set up a folding chair at the fence line and waited. The first HOA resident arrived around 3 p.m., a minivan full of kids. The mom, wearing expensive yoga pants and designer sunglasses, pulled up to the playground entrance and stopped abruptly. I could see her confused expression from 100 yards away. She got out of the van, looked at the cattle grazing peacefully around the swings, looked at me sitting in my chair, and then pulled out her phone. The phone call lasted about 3 minutes. Then she loaded her kids back in the van and drove away. More families arrived over the next hour. Same reaction every time. Confusion, phone calls, and departure. Some parents yelled at me from the road. I waved politely. A few took pictures. I smiled for those. Karen Ashton arrived at 5 p.m. in a white Lexus SUV. She got out of her car like she was entering a battlefield, marching toward the fence with her phone already at her ear. "Mr. Fitzgerald," she shouted, "what do you think you are doing? Grazing my cattle on my land," I called back. "Same thing my family has done for 3 generations. This is a community playground. No, madam, this is my pasture. The court already ruled on that. You are doing this deliberately to sabotage our facility. I am using my property as I see fit. If someone else built something on my property without permission, that is not really my problem." Karen's face was turning that particular shade of red that suggested an impending meltdown. "This is harassment. This is vandalism. I am calling the sheriff." "Please do," I said pleasantly. "Deputy Martinez already knows the situation." She did call the sheriff. Deputy Martinez arrived 30 minutes later, clearly suppressing a grin when he saw the setup. He talked to Karen for a while, then came over to me. "Creative solution," he said quietly. "Is it legal?" I asked. "You are using your own property for agricultural purposes, consistent with its zoning and historical use. I do not see any laws being broken. The cattle do not appear to be damaging the structure, just grazing around it." That is what I thought. Martinez went back to Karen and explained the situation. I could not hear exactly what he said, but her body language suggested she was not happy with his answer. She made several more phone calls, gesturing wildly at my cattle, before finally getting back in her Lexus and speeding away. The cattle did not care about any of it. They just kept eating grass. Word spread fast. By Monday morning, the local newspaper had gotten wind of the story. A reporter named Jennifer Hale called me and asked for an interview. I agreed, figuring public opinion might help my cause. She came out that afternoon with a photographer. We walked the fence line while I explained the entire situation, from the illegal construction to the ignored injunction to my decision to use my land for its intended purpose. "So you are not trying to destroy the playground?" Jennifer asked, taking notes. "Not at all. I am just grazing my cattle. If the playground was not there, I would still be grazing my cattle. It is what I do with this land. It is what it is zoned for. The HOA chose to build their structure in the middle of an active cattle pasture." "But you knew putting cattle there would make the playground unusable." "I knew putting cattle there would make it clear whose land it is," I corrected. "Look, I tried legal channels. I went to the HOA, the county, the courts. The judge issued an injunction and the HOA ignored it. They are currently in contempt of court, so I decided to use my property rights in a way they could not ignore." The article ran on Wednesday with the headline "Land Dispute Turns Playground into Pasture." It was fair and balanced, presenting both sides. The online version got hundreds of comments, most supporting me, some calling me petty, and a few suggesting solutions neither side had considered. The HOA responded by installing a second fence, this one inside my pasture fence, surrounding the playground equipment to keep the cattle out. They did this without my permission, which meant they trespassed on my property to do it. I called my lawyer. She filed another motion. I responded by moving my mineral block and water trough right next to their fence. Cattle like to congregate around food and water. Soon, 20 head of cattle were spending most of their time pressed against the HOA's fence, reaching their heads through whenever possible to get at the grass inside. The smell became an issue quickly. 20 cattle produce a lot of manure. The playground area, which had been pristine and green, became a muddy, manure-covered mess. Parents who tried to use the playground despite the cattle found their children coming home smelling like a barn. Complaints flooded the HOA office. Karen called me directly, her voice shaking with rage. "You are deliberately creating a nuisance. I am raising cattle. You moved your water and feed right next to our playground." I moved my water and feed to a convenient location on my property. Again, if you had not built on my land, this would not be an issue. "We are going to sue you for damages. You are already being sued. I am countersuing for trespassing and illegal construction. Add whatever you want to the pile." She hung up. The HOA held an emergency board meeting. I was not invited, but several residents who were sympathetic to my situation attended and reported back. The meeting was apparently chaotic. Some homeowners were angry at Karen and the board for creating this mess. Others were angry at me for ruining their playground. The legal bills were mounting. The playground was unusable, and every day my cattle grazed happily, making the situation worse. One board member, a reasonable man named Tom Chen, suggested the obvious solution: Admit the mistake, remove the playground, settle with me, and build a new playground on land they actually owned. Karen refused. She had staked her reputation on this fight and was not backing down. Meanwhile, nature was taking its course. My cattle kept grazing, kept fertilizing, and kept making it clear that the playground was in a working pasture. The grass grew tall wherever the cattle had not eaten it. Weeds started appearing. The mulch that the HOA had put down around the equipment was trampled into mud mixed with manure. The bright paint on the playground equipment was getting splattered with dirt, and worse. Some of the HOA residents started a petition to remove Karen from the board. It got over 100 signatures. Others doubled down, putting signs in their yards supporting the board's decision. The subdivision turned into a civil war of sorts, neighbor against neighbor, all because of a playground in my pasture. In late July, the HOA tried a new tactic. They sent a company to clean and maintain the playground despite the cattle. Professional cleaners showed up with power washers and cleaning supplies. My cattle found this development fascinating and gathered to watch. One particularly curious heifer licked a cleaner's arm, which made him jump and spray water everywhere. Another bull decided the power washer sounded threatening and charged the fence. The cleaners left within an hour, having accomplished nothing. The HOA then hired someone to shovel manure daily. That lasted 3 days before the worker quit, saying it was pointless since the cattle just produced more. August brought a heat wave. The smell intensified. The flies were spectacular. The playground was officially closed by the HOA, not because of the injunction but because it was genuinely unusable. Parents were not willing to let their children play in what had effectively become a cattle feedlot. My lawyer called with good news in mid-August. The HOA's lawyer reached out. They want to settle. What are the terms? They admit fault, remove the playground at their expense, pay your legal fees, and pay an additional $10,000 for damages and lost use of your property. I thought about it. What about the contempt charges? Those stay. The judge already ruled they violated the injunction. The fines have been paid. And they admit in writing that it is my land. Yes, complete quitclaim, no future challenges to your ownership. I will take it. The settlement was finalized in September. The HOA board voted 4-1 to approve it, with Karen casting the only dissenting vote. The playground equipment was disassembled and removed over a weekend. Professional restoration crews came in to repair the damage to my meadow, though I told them not to bother with the manure. That was just fertilizer as far as I was concerned. The cattle were moved back to the western pasture. The eastern meadow was mine again, completely and legally with no question. But the story did not end there. In early October, 2 things happened. First, the Gallatin County Prosecutor's Office opened an investigation into how the HOA's fraudulent plat map had been approved by the county. Someone had either been grossly negligent or had been paid to look the other way. Second, several homeowners in Mountain Ridge Estates filed a lawsuit against Karen Ashton and the HOA board for mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. I was contacted by the prosecutor's office and gave a full statement. They were particularly interested in the timeline of events and the documents showing that the county had approved the HOA plat without checking existing deeds. My testimony was apparently part of a larger investigation into corruption in the county planning department. In November, a county planning official named Gerald Marks was arrested and charged with accepting bribes from developers to expedite approvals without proper review. The charges included multiple counts related to various developments, including Mountain Ridge Estates. Apparently, The HOA's developer had paid Gerald $5,000 to push through their plat map without the normal verification process. Karen Ashton was not directly charged with any crimes, but the civil lawsuit against her and the board was moving forward. The homeowners were seeking to recover all the money wasted on the playground project, the legal fees, the settlement payment to me, and the restoration costs. They were also seeking to remove the entire board and install new leadership. I followed the news with interest, but tried to stay out of it. My cattle were happy, my meadow was recovering, and my property rights were secure. That was enough for me. In December, I received an unexpected visitor. Tom Chen, the reasonable board member who had suggested settling early, came to my property. He was no longer on the board, having resigned in protest of Karen's handling of the situation. "I wanted to apologize," he said, standing at my front door with his hands in his pockets. "I should have fought harder to stop that playground from being built. I reviewed the survey before the project started and I should have caught the discrepancy. I did not do my due diligence and you suffered because of it. I appreciated the apology. You were not the one pushing this fight, Karen was. True, but I was complicit by not stopping it. For what it is worth, she is being removed from the board. The membership voted her out last week." "Good. There is something else," Tom said hesitantly. "The new board wants to make this right beyond the settlement. We are planning a community apology and we would like to invite you." "No pressure, but I think it would help heal the division in our community if people could hear your side directly." I thought about it. Part of me wanted nothing to do with Mountain Ridge Estates ever again. But another part recognized that most of the residents had been innocent victims of their board's incompetence. They had paid the dues that funded the playground. They had been the ones fighting with neighbors over something they did not fully understand. "I will think about it," I told Tom. I did attend the community meeting in January. The new HOA board president, a younger woman named Rachel Morrison, gave a formal apology on behalf of the association. She outlined all the mistakes that had been made, the policies they were implementing to prevent similar issues, and their commitment to being better neighbors. Then she invited me to speak. I kept it simple. I explained that I did not blame the residents for what happened. I understood their disappointment about losing the playground, but I hoped they understood that I had been protecting my family's land, my livelihood, and my rights. I was not the villain in this story. I was just a cattle rancher who wanted to be left alone to work my land in peace. The response was mixed but mostly positive. Several residents apologized personally. A few still glared at me like I had ruined their lives. But overall, it felt like closure. Karen Ashton never apologized. She moved out of Mountain Ridge Estates in February, selling her house and leaving Montana entirely. I heard through the grapevine that she had gotten a job with another HOA in Arizona. I felt sorry for those homeowners. The county corruption case went to trial in March. Gerald Marks was convicted on multiple counts of bribery and fraud. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution. The judge was particularly harsh in her sentencing statement, noting that Marks had betrayed the public trust and caused substantial harm to innocent property owners. The civil lawsuit against the former HOA board settled out of court. Karen and the other board members paid a substantial portion of the damages personally, with their HOA board liability insurance covering the rest. The new board used the recovered funds to build a proper playground on land they actually owned, with extensive verification of the property boundaries beforehand. By spring, life had returned to normal for me. My eastern meadow was lush and green, the grass growing thick from all the natural fertilization the cattle had provided. The wildflowers were blooming again, painting the landscape in purples and yellows. My cattle rotated through the pastures as they always had, oblivious to the drama they had been part of. I did make one change to my property. At the entrance to my eastern meadow, I installed a sign. It was a nice wooden sign, professionally made, with carved letters that said, Fitzgerald Family Ranch, ESD, 1967, private property, cattle grazing area. Below that, in slightly smaller letters, I added, Verify property lines before building. It made me smile every time I saw it. The local newspaper did a follow-up article in April, 1 year after the whole thing started. Jennifer Hale interviewed me again, asking how I felt about everything that had happened. Vindicated, I told her honestly, but also tired. I never wanted a fight. I just wanted to be left alone to work my land. The system failed me at multiple points, and I had to find creative ways to protect my rights. I am glad it worked out, but I wish it had never been necessary. Any advice for others in similar situations? I thought about that. Know your property lines. Keep good records. And do not be afraid to stand up for your rights, even when it feels like the whole world is against you. Sometimes being stubborn is the same thing as being right. The article quoted several legal experts who noted that my case had highlighted serious problems with property verification processes in many counties. Several states, including Montana, were reviewing their procedures to prevent similar issues. My little land dispute had apparently sparked some actual reform. In May, I attended the grand opening of Mountain Ridge Estate's new playground. It was built on land that was definitely, verifiably, completely owned by the HOA. The new board had invited me as a gesture of goodwill, and I decided to accept. It seemed like the right thing to do. The playground was nice, maybe even nicer than the one they had tried to build on my land. Children played on the equipment while parents watched from proper benches. Rachel Morrison gave a short speech thanking everyone who had helped make it happen, and she specifically acknowledged the hard lessons the community had learned about property rights and due diligence. We made mistakes, she said to the gathered crowd. Serious mistakes that cost our community money, time, and harmony. But we learned from them. We are better neighbors now because of it, and we owe Mr. Fitzgerald an enormous debt of gratitude for his patience and ultimately for his willingness to forgive us. People clapped. I nodded acknowledgement but did not make a speech. I had said everything I needed to say. Tom Chen came over afterward with his kids who were playing on the new swings. Thank you for coming, he said, shaking my hand. It means a lot. Nice playground, I said sincerely. I hope the kids enjoy it. They will. And it is definitely on our land this time. We had 3 independent surveys done, I laughed. Probably a good policy going forward. Life moved on. Summer came, and with it the steady routine of ranch work. Hay to cut, cattle to move, fences to mend. My property remained mine, undisputed and peaceful. The eastern meadow showed no signs of ever having hosted a playground. Nature had reclaimed it completely, just grass and wildflowers and the occasional cow wandering through. I did keep one memento from the whole ordeal. When the HOA had removed the playground equipment, one of the workers had asked if I wanted anything from it. I told him to surprise me. A week later, he dropped off one of the swings, just the seat and chains. I hung it from a sturdy branch of an old cottonwood tree near my house. It was a nice swing, well made, and it seemed a shame to waste it. Sometimes, sitting on that swing in the evening, looking out over my meadows with my cattle grazing peacefully in the distance, I thought about everything that had happened. The anger, the frustration, the absurdity of fighting over something that should have been so simple. But I also thought about the victory, small as it might seem in the grand scheme of things. I had stood up for my rights. I had protected my land. I had won. In October, I got a letter from the county. They had finished their review and correction of property records. My eastern meadow was now correctly registered in all databases as my property, with multiple verification flags to prevent future errors. They apologized for the mistake and thanked me for my patience in helping them identify and fix the problem. I filed the letter away with all the other documents from that year. Legal papers, court orders, settlement agreements, all the paperwork that proved I owned what I had always owned. The cattle, of course, could not read any of those documents. They did not care about property lines or HOA disputes or legal battles. They just cared about grass, and I made sure they always had plenty of it. As autumn painted the mountains in gold and red, I took stock of my life. The ranch was doing well. The cattle were healthy. My land was secure. I had even made some unexpected friends in Mountain Ridge estates, people who had reached out after everything settled to apologize and build bridges. Was I bitter about the whole experience? Sometimes. Was I glad it was over? Absolutely. Would I do anything differently if I had to do it again? Maybe hire a lawyer sooner, maybe be more aggressive about stopping the construction immediately. But overall, I was satisfied with how I had handled it. I had not compromised my principles. I had not backed down when it would have been easier to just let them win. And I had found a solution that was creative, legal, and ultimately effective. The cattle grazing in the playground had been the turning point. It had made national news in a small way, one of those quirky stories that people shared on social media with laughing emojis. But for me, it had been deadly serious. It was my stand, my line in the sand, my declaration that I would not be pushed around by an HOA that thought money and lawyers could overcome basic property rights. In December, almost 2 years after the construction crew had first torn up my meadow, I stood in that same spot with my grandfather's old property map. He had drawn it by hand in the 1970s, marking every fence line, every water source, every significant feature of the land. In one corner he had written in his careful handwriting, "Fitzgerald land, keep it working, keep it wild." I had done that. Through everything, I had kept it working and kept it wild. The cattle had helped with that, turning an attempted playground back into the meadow it was meant to be. Nature had done the rest. As I stood there in the cold December air, my breath fogging in front of me, I heard the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. My herd, doing what they had always done, what they would keep doing long after this whole stupid dispute was forgotten. Grazing, living, being part of the land in a way that no playground ever could be. I folded the map carefully and put it back in my truck. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that reminded me why I lived here, why I fought for this land, why I would keep fighting for it as long as I drew breath. The HOA had learned a hard lesson about property rights. The county had learned about the importance of verification. The community had learned about the costs of leadership failures. And I had learned that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. When they built a playground on my meadow, I grazed my cattle there and let nature take over. It was not fancy or complicated, but it worked. As I drove home that evening, past the new playground in Mountain Ridge Estates where children still played safely on land that actually belonged to the HOA, I felt no animosity. Just a quiet satisfaction that everything had worked out as it should. Justice had been served, not quickly or easily, but thoroughly. The sign at my property entrance stood proud in the fading light, its message clear. This was Fitzgerald land. It had been for 3 generations, and if I had anything to say about it, it would be for 3 more. My cattle had helped me prove that point, one day of grazing at a time, and for that, I would always be grateful to them. After all, they had done what cattle do best: eat grass, ignore human drama, and remind everyone that some things are more fundamental than property disputes or HOA politics. The land endures, the cattle graze, and I was just lucky enough to be the steward of both, protecting them from those who would pave over the meadow and call it progress. That was my story. The story of how an HOA built a playground on my meadow, and how I grazed my cattle there and let nature take over. It was not the story I wanted to live through, but it was the story I got. And in the end, I suppose that was enough.